Okay, I want to thank you guys for coming out. I got some notes prepared here because I was afraid I would forget to announce something, but I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to come out and spend the evening with us. I know most of you guys personally in the room, and I know that you are some of the most productive people I know. So productive people are usually really busy, so I appreciate your time to spend the evening with us. As you all know, we're going to be talking about Belize tonight. I thought I'd share my experience a little bit, how I came across the project and the guys that are involved there. Probably about 5 years ago, when I started getting serious about real estate investing, I stumbled across the Real Estate Guys radio show. As I was doing my searching and educating myself, they have a podcast that I listen to every week. They are the #1 downloaded podcast on real estate investing, with over 3 million downloads and listeners in 191 countries. So I started listening to these guys, ended up going with them on a week-long cruise where there was a lot of real estate education. There were seminars on board, and it's where I met John Turley. Met John Turley, and he was one of our stops happened to be Ambergris, Belize. John Turley is the main sales force behind the largest development project in Ambergris, Belize. The Real Estate Guys are the marketing arm of that project. And after the cruise, I stayed in touch with Robert Helms and Russell Gray from the Real Estate Guys, and went to a few of their events. And I've since invested with them in private placement and also invested with some of their affiliates. To date, they are some of the best investments in my portfolio. The reason I tell you all this is because if I was looking at a deal internationally and I would not know the team that's involved in the ground personally, it would scare me to death. I am very comfortable with the team down there, and I will tell you they are world class. Due to what I see happening over there and what I know about the market, having been there 4 times over the last 2 years, can't help but share it with friends. After all, you can't have, there's only so much fun you can have by yourself. For those of you who haven't been to Belize yet, I think this is a great opportunity to see firsthand data on what's actually happening. And I couldn't think of anybody better to give you that data than John Turley himself. In fact, today I asked him a question about something in Belize that he said, I don't know. And I said, John, that's the first thing that I ever asked you about what's happening in Belize that I heard you say, I don't know. So anyway, John Turley is 45 years old. He's happily married to Lucinda Turley. They celebrate 20 years of marriage together. They are parents of 3 children together. Trent, age 16, Christina, age 12, Lauren, age 8. The Turley family are in their 9th year of living full-time in Ambergris, Belize. John's vast real estate experience extends over 22 years. He is experienced in commercial and residential property management, commercial and residential real estate sales, and marketing, as well as real estate development, investment appraisal, and consulting. John Turley is the founder and owner, or co-owner, of 3 active real estate companies: Elite Real Estate Investments Ltd., Remax Southwind in Ambergris, Belize. He is also founder, owner, managing broker. Remax Island Real Estate in Kikauka, Belize, founder, owner, managing broker. For 3 consecutive years, 2011, 2012, 2013, John Turley has ranked among the top 30 individual Remax associates worldwide in commissions earned. Out of a total of more than 92,000 associates, John has been the #1 top producing real estate or Remax associate for all the Caribbean, Central America, and South America for 2011, 2012, and 2013. With all that, please help me welcome my good friend and fellow real estate investor, John Turley.
So, very kind words from Dave. I really appreciate your hospitality in turning out tonight. In fact, I had to thank Dave that his hospitality was so great. I was planning to fly out tomorrow morning, and he arranged things such that I get to probably stay another day. The airlines have already informed me that I won't be leaving in the morning. But I sincerely appreciate your hospitality, because I get to talk about something that I'm passionate about, which is my home, where I live, Yes, it is what I'm involved with for my vocation, for my business, but I think that you'll see through the course of the presentation that it's something I'm very passionate about. And I think what will be very interesting is, regardless of what the final outcome is for yourself based on tonight's presentation, I think it'll be very fascinating and interesting just in terms of educating yourselves with regard to real estate investment, and particularly the study of a market that might be very different than what you've ever looked at before. And it just kind of broadens our eyes in terms of kind of a global perspective of what's happening in other countries and other regions of the world, and how part of what we experience here can have an effect in that regard. This is a photo taken on the island of Ambergris Caye, Belize. In fact, this is about 100 or 150 feet from the door of my office, so it's a nice little walk on the beach, and I'm anxious to get back to the warm weather, I have to admit. I lived in Colorado and I lived in Portland, Maine for a number of years, and apparently the blood changes when you've been away from the cold weather, as I discovered when I landed here and it was 18 degrees. So our story begins with me sharing a little bit about personally what brought me to Belize, because it dovetails quite nicely with our having an understanding of what the real estate opportunity is in a tourist destination market such as Belize. And so I'm going to start with my story, and then I'll kind of leave that aside for a little bit, and we'll come back to it and we'll see how it fits into the greater picture. So the restaurants in Belize almost always have a sign above the door that says, "No shirt, no shoes, no problem." And so just kind of gives you an idea of it's somewhat the laid-back atmosphere. But this is a picture of my family when we first moved to Belize, and at the bottom there it says mission, objective, quality of life. So this is my youngest, Lauren, was just an infant when we moved. My wife, Lucinda, Christina, and Trent. Trent was 8 years old here. He's 16 now, he'll be 17 in July. But Trent is kind of a critical part of our story, because in February 2005, when Trent was 8 years old, I had two businesses. I had a graphics company and a real estate company, both of which were very successful financially, and I had a home office. I was very blessed to be able to work close to my family in close proximity and work out of my home. And I thought that I was a very good provider for my family, and if you only measure it based on the financial statistics, I was a good provider. But that was where I made my mistake, because I didn't really give thought to the other measurements of what qualifies somebody as providing for their family. And one day my son passed by the home office, and I looked at him, and I had to do a double take, because I realized, my goodness, he's getting big. And I realized, I just stopped to think, how old? Oh my goodness, he's 8 years old. And why that was so frightening is that in all honesty, the last time I really had paid close attention to his age was when he was 5. And even though I was literally right there in the room, right next to my wife homeschools the children, and so I'm literally in the same house, but I was so absorbed in managing my businesses and managing the companies, and it scared the life out of me. I told my wife that night that it just, I only get one chance to be a father, and my son's only going to be 12 once, he's only going to be 16 once, you only get a do-over. And she said, "Okay, well, I'm glad you feel that way. What are we going to do about it?" And I said, I really think that we need to really think seriously about quality of life and our relationship as husband and wife, and as parents and mother and father, and what kind of lasting memories we inculcate in our children, and the values and our closeness as a family. And so we said our mission objective was quality of life, and we made the decision to walk away from our companies and to try to find the environment or the setting that we thought, at least for us, would allow us as a family to have the highest quality of life possible. And we said that we would move anywhere in the world. I grew up with my father in the oil industry. I spent 9 years in Europe up until going to university. And so I had lived internationally and had really enjoyed the perspective of traveling and seeing the country from many different angles. So we set about on a search, and we thought, having a beautiful climate would be a good thing. That would contribute to a good quality of life. We wanted to go somewhere that would be beautiful. We wanted it to be English speaking, because I'm horrible with languages. I've tried very, very hard to learn foreign languages. My son is on his 4th language. I'm very proud of him, but boy, I for the life of me, I can't learn a language. So English speaking was very important to us. And ironically, 91% of Americans are English speaking and don't speak a second language. So we had that in common with many people. But we started looking at a list of criteria, and some of the criteria, we wanted it to be safe, we wanted, very secure place for our children, that we didn't have to worry about there being a high crime rate. We wanted to make sure that the country itself was politically stable, economically stable. There were a whole host of factors. And so these weren't all necessarily the factors that were of foremost importance to us. We wanted to be in close proximity. We didn't want to be too far away because my parents, my wife's parents, or extended family, we wanted to be able to visit and so on and so forth. And so, long story short, we came up with a short list, and Belize is the only English-speaking country in Central America. Absolutely beautiful country. Almost half of the country is national park and marine reserve. Beautiful climate. As safe a place as I have ever been. And it just seemed to have so many of the characteristics that we were looking for. And so we went to spy out the land, as it were, and came back after a week and decided we thought that this was the right place for us. And so we made the move. That was our personal decision, and we've been there 8.5 years now. And I'll leave the story for the moment, but it'll really play a key role in understanding what's happening in the marketplace today. So every year, or I should say every quarter of every year for the last 8.5 years, we ask ourselves, and we still do this today, is this still where we feel we can have the best quality of life as a family? And the answer has consistently been yes, because I can own my businesses, I can own my real estate interests. I don't have to live in Ambergris Caye, Belize to provide for my family, but we continue to feel that that's the place for us. So we'll kind of revisit that thought here in just a moment. These are just a couple of photos just to show what it's like there on the island. The island of Ambergris Caye is 12 miles off the mainland coast, and we'll look at some aerial photos in a minute to kind of get a perspective. That's what we use for bait when we go fishing. And no, that would be a tall tale, but that is what you catch when you go fishing. So that's kind of a nice touch. And we don't have there's no McDonald's, there's no Starbucks, there's no in fact, there's no franchise foods or anything. This is actually 3 different fast food restaurants side by side, and we don't have there's no stoplights. In fact, I think there's 2 stoplights in the country of Belize, and so Dave asked me today if I remembered what a stoplight was, just driving around, so I wouldn't get into a traffic accident. So the country of Belize is made up of 2 components. There's the mainland and there's the Keys. The mainland borders Guatemala and Mexico. And then the Keys are located just offshore here, and our focus is going to be here on the island of Ambergris Caye, so we'll kind of zoom in a little bit closer. But just to mention real briefly that 46% of Belize, almost half of the country, is National Park and Marine Reserve. And the best way to kind of give the analogy of the significance of that is if you just picture for a moment if everything east of the Mississippi River was national park, just think how big an area that would be, proportionate to the size of the United States. And so I've tried to find if there's any country in the world that has set aside more of its land to protect and to have stewardship of as a national park and marine reserve. It's the highest percentage that I can find, and it's really pretty amazing. Of course, a very, very low population density, 330,000 people in the entire country, so there's a lot of land that's uninhabited, but that's an amazing statistic there. So the island of Ambergris Caye, where I live, is 24 miles long. There's a national park and marine reserve at the northern end that's 27,000 acres. You can actually see that that's the largest part of the landmass on the island itself. And then the world's largest living barrier reef is right along the shoreline here. It's only a quarter mile. It's about 400 to 600 yards from the beach. So when we're standing on the beach, we actually are looking out at the waves. The waves don't break on the beach, they break over the barrier reef, which is about 400 yards away. You'll be able to see it on the aerial photo to come up. World-class water sports, really the best diving and snorkeling and fishing to be found anywhere in the world, whether it's reef fishing, deep sea fishing, fly fishing, spear fishing. So just tremendous water sports. It says here that the population is 20,000, but we just got a new statistic last week that we're up to 22,000. Now, by comparison, if you're familiar with the islands of either Grand Cayman or Roatan, Honduras, those are both about the same size, and they both have populations of 60,000 people. So they're about 3 times the population density, just for basis of comparison. Now, for the purposes of our story and for our discussion tonight about real estate investing, this room count here is really key to understanding the market. Now, room count refers to everything that is rented on a nightly or weekly basis, what we call tourist accommodations. Now, unlike most real estate markets in the United States, where rentals are primarily long-term rentals with a monthly rental amount and a 6-month lease or a 1-year lease or a month-to-month lease, in this market, almost all of the rentals are nightly or weekly because it's visitors or tourists who are coming into the market. Consequently, the rents are considerably higher. A property that might rent for $1,400 a month would instead rent for $400 a night. And so you can see why most people would prefer to rent on a nightly basis as opposed to a long-term basis. Now, back in 2006, if you added up every condo, every villa, every house, every bed and breakfast, every hotel or motel on the entire island, the whole length of the 24 miles, there were 670 rooms. So you can tell that's a pretty small number. And that wasn't the total number that were available to rent, that was the total number, period. Now, some of those people lived in, because not every condo that was built was rented out. Fast forward 7 years later, and the number's tripled. It's 2,000 rooms. Now, some would say, well, if you tripled the inventory in 6-7 years, maybe it's overbuilt. Well, not when you're starting out with that few rooms. In fact, what happened, 2,000 rooms is really, when you're studying a tourism destination, that's when you reach what's called critical mass. It's like the match striking the matchbook. That's when there's enough momentum in a market to be able to have 3 very important groups start paying attention: the travel agents, the charter companies, and the consolidators. So charter companies won't look at a tourist destination unless there's at least 2,000 rooms. There's just not economies of scale for them to really pay it any heed. Same with charter companies. Charter companies are companies that will block out a block of rooms or a block of seats on an airplane, and they can't do that either unless there's sufficient room count. There have to be economies of scale. So when we reached 2,000 rooms, we expected that we would start to see some radical changes in growth in the tourism statistics. So it was really the end of 2012 when we hit that number of 2,000 rooms. And we're going to talk about what happened at the end of 2012 and really what's happening today and the opportunity that presents. So this is an aerial photo of the island that we were just talking about. This is looking from the north to the south. This is the barrier reef itself. And these openings right here are natural cuts or channels in the reef. That's where, if we're going to go by boat, then we're going to go inside and outside the reef through the channels. And the water from here to the shore is just 6 to 10 feet deep. The water out here is the deepest water in all the Caribbean. It's 3,000 to 3,500 feet deep, so more than a half mile of depth. So when we go deep sea fishing, we're deep sea fishing right here. You're inside of the shoreline all day long. It makes it pretty convenient. But this is looking from north to south. This is where the town is located, the town of San Pedro. And so as we zoom in a little closer, this is the town of San Pedro. This is the airstrip. You can come to San Pedro by boat or by plane. And there's probably about equal number of people who come by boat from Belize City or by plane from the international airport. This is downtown. You notice the downtown doesn't have any high-rises. There's a building code or a building restriction on the island that nothing can be taller than 44 feet or 4 stories high. Now, the reason for that's quite simple, because that's how high a coconut palm tree grows. And you can't build anything taller than a coconut palm tree. I think that's pretty good. It helps the aesthetics of the island, and it ensures that instead of having these towering buildings, we've got beautiful vegetation and coconut palm trees. So I think the town council, when they set that many years ago, they had a good idea. Now this is what we call Front Street. There's Front Street, Middle Street. I can't remember, what's the other one? Back Street, that's right. So Front Street, Middle Street, and Back Street. And this shows the 3 primary modes of transportation. We've got a bicycle, we've got a golf cart, and on foot. So those are the 3 primary modes of transportation. There are some taxis as well, but you really won't see any cars for the most part. It's primarily golf carts. And we just got, it was only 6 years ago we got our first pavement, the first concrete or cobblestones. Prior to that it was just packed sand. We still, on a 24-mile Long Island, we have 2 miles of paved road and 22 miles of unpaved road. So we're not exactly blistering with with development. This is what it looks like when you get beneath the water, and this is a Belize traffic jam right here. And what you don't see in the photo are the lobsters and the manatee and the sea turtles, but otherwise, it's like swimming in an aquarium, and that's a pretty typical photo there. Same here, just in terms of how much marine life there is. Now, there's the hockey player Wayne Gretzky said that what made him successful at the game of hockey was skating to where the puck is going to be, not to where it has been. And as a real estate investor, or anytime we're looking to make an investment, we want to be forward thinking. We want to think in terms of where the puck is going and see if we can understand the market moving forward. And so that's where our discussion is going to go from here. This is one more photo just for context to help us to have in mind what the island looks like. So this is the town of San Pedro here. This is the airstrip we talked about. The mainland is over here, about 12 miles to the west, and then this is the barrier reef as we mentioned previously. This is the border between Belize and Mexico right here. And there's a national park on the Belize side, and there's a national park on the Mexico side, so no real population to speak of between the two. Now, there's three foundation pillars of the market. We'll go through these fairly quickly, but it's always important. Anytime you're investing in a business or investing in real estate, you have to understand what the critical drivers are, what causes the business or the real estate to be successful, because unless you understand what the foundation pillars are or the critical drivers, then you really don't have a basis for knowing whether there's a sound reason to think that things are going to continue on the present course, get better, or get worse for that matter. So the first of these is tourism. And so when we look at tourism, it's really key to understanding that tourism is a way for us to look into the future. It's what we call a leading indicator as opposed to a lagging indicator. So with tourism, if we know that a market is going to grow by 10% in tourism in a given year, then it's very easy to understand that the year following will see a commensurate increase in real estate investment and appreciation in values. The reason I can say that is that in a market such as Ambergris Caye, if there's 100 people that come to the market visiting for the first time as tourists, there's a certain number who are going to decide that this is a beautiful place and we'd like to have a second home or a vacation home or an investment property or a rental property. And so we don't know what number that is, but we can say that it's X. That X equals the percent of people that will choose to take action in the marketplace. Now, if the number 100 grows to 120, 20% increase, then we would expect that X would increase by 20% because it's relative, it's proportionate. So by studying tourism, it tells us what's going to happen in the following year. Not every industry gives us a peek into the future that's quite so crystal clear, but that's the case in this market. So the Belize tourism timeline helps us to understand what's happening and what's causing it to happen. Now, Belize has a very small budget, everything being relative. If you take the total marketing and advertising budget of the whole country, the Belize Tourism Board, the Tourism Industry Association, Hotel Industry Association, it's $6 million. The Dominican Republic has $71 million. RE/MAX spends $1 billion a year on marketing and advertising. I can't fathom how much that is, but by comparison, Belize having $6 million, pretty small number. So when a publication like Islands Magazine comes out and says that this is one of the top 10 islands in the world to live on, and they consistently rate it that way for 8 years in a row, well, that's advertising that Belize doesn't have to pay for out of their $6 million budget. So it's very beneficial in terms of helping people to know and understand about the market. The same publication in 2009 said that Ambergris Caye is the #1 island in the world to retire to. Of course, that's only if you're looking to retire to an island, which not everybody is. But among those who are looking to retire to islands, they said this is the best one there is. Now, at the end of 2012, we mentioned that was the year that we reached 2,000 rooms, or we hit critical mass. So this was the year that we would expect that we would really start to see some things happen in terms of the market heating up. Well, that year alone, we saw a 16% increase in overnight tourism arrivals. Now that was on top of a record year, 2011. So it's an all-time record in terms of the number of people that have come into the country. It happened to be the same year that the Mayan calendar was thought to perhaps say that the world was going to end. So a lot of people thought, well, maybe people are going to Belize so they can be there for the end of the world. And there were a lot of people, amazingly as it is, a lot of people that visited the country purely for that reason in the fourth quarter of the year. And lo and behold, we're still here. But we didn't know if it was an anomaly, if was tourism going to go up that year and then drop the next. And I felt fairly strongly that all of the evidence I'm going to share with you tonight really indicated this was just the start of something significant that was going to happen, not just for 1 year, 2 years, but really for the next 15 years, and I'll explain exactly why tonight. But a 16.3% increase. Now it's important to understand, in a market with 2,000 rooms, if you have a 16% increase in tourism, then you need to have a 16% increase in the number of condos or hotel rooms that are built and that are made available that year. Does that make sense? So it begs the question, in 2012, how many new units were delivered? How many new units came available? And the answer was less than 30. So 16% of 2,000 is 320, and there were less than 30 that came on the market. So just that one statistic alone tells us that demand is outstripping supply. But of course, that was 2012. It begs the question, what's been happening since then? Now in 2013, we all wanted to know, is it going to continue to grow? Is it going to stop, or is it going to drop? And what happened was, TripAdvisor, in the beginning of the year, they're what they call the Traveler's Choice Awards, which is reviews from millions of people from 82 different countries, said that Ambergris Caye was the #1 island in the world to visit for tourism. Well, that was a huge amount of advertising that came available that was far beyond the scope of a $6 million advertising budget. And as a consequence of that, plus the continued growth, in the first half of the year, and this actually now is carried all the way through the entire year, it was almost 9% growth in 2013. So you've got 16% increase 1 year, 9% increase on top of that the next year, and in 2013 there were less than 20 rooms, 20 units that were delivered. So significantly lagging on the production side, but on the demand side, the demand is ever increasing. We're going to take a look now at how much more the demand is increasing this year and the reasons why. Just real quickly, this slide just makes the point that the demand isn't just in one season or one time of year. In fact, if you look at 26 months in a row, starting in September 2011, the year-over-year increase in tourism was consistent for 25 of those 26 months. The only month there wasn't a growth in tourism from year over year was April of last year, April of 2013. There was 144 people short, one plane load, of breaking the record. It would have been 26 months ago. Now, Islands Magazine, just to kind of continue the trend, in September last year said that it's the best island to live on for retiring early. And of course, with the baby boomers, the largest demographic in world history, retiring over an 18-year period, that's pretty significant. So when you look at the overnight arrivals to Belize from 2009 to 2012, there's a 19.33% increase. That's pretty big in any market. But living there full time, I knew that the growth has really been more than that. And I had a hard time coming to terms with the numbers, because even though 19.33% is a big number, that's for the country. And I wanted to know specifically for the island how much was the growth. So I contacted the Belize Tourism Board, and they said, John, we don't tabulate those figures. And I said, but you have the raw data, because when people come in the country, they fill out a form and go through passport control, and so you have access to the information. I said, well, we do, but we'd have to calculate that. We don't publish a report with that information. I said, well, would you please do it for me? It would really be helpful. And they acquiesced and said they would do that. And it helped me to see that the growth in Ambergris Caye far outpaced the rest of the country. What it showed was that it's actually a 57.53% increase in overnight arrivals over the same 3-year period. So it's a very disproportionate number of people who are coming to the island as opposed to coming to the country as a whole. And so that just further illustrated the point that the growth is really outstripping what's being built and what needs to be in the marketplace. So it brings up the thought of insider trading. Now, when you think of the term insider trading as it relates to Wall Street, first thing that most people think of that comes to mind is jail term or illegality. That insider trading is something that's wrong. As it applies to real estate, quite often the thought is that it relates to wealth. Insider trading is not wrong. In fact, it's really at the heart of the basis for why most people choose to invest in one form of real estate over another, because they feel that they have an understanding or a knowledge of what's transpiring. They might know of a company that's moving into the area that's going to cause values to go up. And so very different thought or concept when it comes to real estate in terms of understanding a market and knowing what's happening in a marketplace. The more we know, the more we understand, the less uncertainty there is in making a decision. At the end of last year, just 45 days ago, TripAdvisor said that Ambergris Caye is one of the top 10 destinations on the rise, one of the top 10 up-and-coming destinations in the world. And again, this was far beyond the scope of a $6 million advertising budget. And so the press, the media, is bringing a tremendous amount of attention to an island that, again, is only 24 miles long and 22,000 people. And as a result of all of the media coverage in the press, the demand continues to increase, so much so that the airlines have started adding flights at an almost unbelievable rate. American Airlines has increased their nonstop flights from Dallas to Belize from 3 times a week to daily service, 7 times a week. That's 4 additional flights every week. Delta Airlines currently has daily nonstop flights from Atlanta, but they're now adding a second nonstop flight on Saturdays. Delta also started new direct flights from Los Angeles to Belize on Saturdays starting December 21st. That was less than 2 months ago. And if you just add up those flights alone, it's a net increase of 960 passenger seats to Belize every week. Now, 3/4 of all people who go to Belize by air are headed to Ambergris Caye. So that's about 700 seats per week that are added to the inventory in terms of demand. You think of which is easier to do, to add one more flight or to add the number of hotel rooms that have to be built to accommodate the passengers on the plane. One of the airlines can simply redirect the plane and bring an extra 160 people to the country at the snap of a finger. And if 75% of those passengers are headed to the island, it's 120 people, a minimum of 60 rooms. But the time it takes to build a 60-room hotel is considerably longer. So the bottleneck isn't the airlines, the bottleneck is really the real estate, the inventory being produced and built. Now, it's not just these airlines. Southwest Airlines, the largest domestic airline in the United States, has started work on their first international terminal at Houston Hobby Airport to be completed in 2015. And starting this summer, they'll be offering direct flights from Houston Hobby to Belize. So the largest domestic airline adding itself to the list of those airlines that will have direct flights to Belize. United Airlines went from offering 1 flight a week from Newark, New Jersey, to offering 4 flights a week from Newark, New Jersey. Now, this is not on a year-round basis. It's during the holidays and the peak travel periods. But again, this was a huge development in increasing an additional 520 seats per week to and from Belize. And then United Airlines has also announced that they'll be adding nonstop flights from Los Angeles, so they'll be joining Delta Airlines. It's amazing, between December 19th and December 21st, just that 1 week before Christmas, we went from not having direct flights from either the New York City metropolitan area or Los Angeles to having direct flights from the 2 largest populated areas in the entire United States. Just last week, there was an announcement in the paper. This was, I tried to have current information for you, so this was Thursday, February 6th. And this shows the Belize government investing $60 million into a water, sewer, and road expansion project for the island of Ambergris Caye. And very interesting quote from the Minister of Tourism and from the mayor, saying that having seen the multi-million-dollar investments made by the private sector, the government of Belize is committed to improve the tourism image of the island. So very fascinating that the government would acknowledge and see that private investment, that private developers are pouring money into building new hotels and condos. And in response to that, the government has said, you know, we need to do our part as well. We see the growth in demand, we see all the extra flights, we see all the extra passenger loads from the planes, and so we're going to invest back into the island ourselves to the tune. Now that's a Belize dollar figure. It's a 2-to-1 exchange rate, so that's $30 million US, just to put it into context. But $30 million is equal to 10% of the entire national debt of the country of Belize. So proportionately, that's a pretty huge commitment to the tourism just of the island. So that takes care of tourism. If tourism was the only foundation pillar in the market, I could give you some very substantive reasons why the market is going to be a great place to invest over the next several years. but really that's just part of the story. The baby boomers are an equally large, if not larger, part of the story. Now, who here by a show of hands has heard of the term baby boomers or knows that they exist? They're real. They're not a hypothesis. They're not a theory. In fact, they represent the largest demographic of people to ever move through human society. There were 76 million people born between 1946 and 1964, that 18-year period. And they started hitting the age of 65 in the year 2011. At that time, there were 7,000 a day reaching the age of 65 every single day. Now, fast forward just 2 years later to 2013, and the number hitting 65 every day reached 10,000. It's a 42.8% increase. That's a massive, massive number. Now, the majority of baby boomers are still in their peak earning years. They're in their late 40s to mid 50s. But what this represents is just such a huge mass of people moving through society that it's hard to forecast the impact that they're going to have through the retirement years. If you look at when most of the elementary schools were built in the United States, they were built in the 1950s, and it was in direct response to the baby boom. We can see what has happened as they've moved throughout society. The interesting thing is that over the course of the entire 18 years, the average number of people retiring each day is going to be 11,765. That's an increase of an additional 17.5%. So the numbers are just really off the charts. And we know definitively we're in year 3 of an 18-year wave. There's very few things that we can be certain about when we're investing and we're forecasting into the future. There are very few of us that could pick any company that trades on Wall Street, for example, and say with any certainty that the company will even exist in 10 years. And yet we know for a certainty that 79 million people will turn the age of 65 between the years of 2011 and 2028 or 2029. Absolutely definitively. We have 15 years of unprecedented growth ahead of us. And what do all of these people have in common? Or most of them, I should say, is desirable retirement destinations. It doesn't mean they're going to act on it. It doesn't mean they're going to leave. In many cases, they happen to have a desirable retirement destination right where they are. But there is a very significant number who are looking to go elsewhere, who are looking to move somewhere else. And the way I describe this is it's the world's largest game of musical chairs. If you can picture for a second that every chair in this room is a different retirement destination, some chairs will be more desirable than others. There are some people who are influenced by climate and would prefer to perhaps be in a warmer climate. There are some people who would perhaps prefer to be along the coast and enjoy the beach or enjoy the mountains or enjoy being closer to the Appalachians or the Rocky Mountains or what have you. So that being the case, every year for 18 years, more and more people are entering the game of musical chairs and the number of chairs remain the same. So if we can look in and see which chairs are more desirable, then we're going to have an unfair advantage in seeing which markets are going to be positively influenced by this wave of people coming through society. And most people don't think of Roy Rogers for his real estate quotes, but Roy Rogers, I love the quote, said that find out where people are heading and invest there before they arrive. Sounds pretty simple. And really it is that simple. And so we're going to talk about where they're going and exactly how to get there before they arrive. There's a study that was done by the AARP, and the AARP found that 59% of baby boomers plan to relocate. Now, it should come as no surprise that a large number of them plan to go to Florida, and a large number plan to go to Arizona. Those are the 2 most popular states in the United States for people to relocate retirement. But the question for us is, what about the other 28 million who plan to relocate somewhere else? Where are they perhaps looking to go? Well, just to help us to understand the number of people who retire abroad, you've maybe never considered it, or maybe you have, but the total number of Americans who are living outside of the United States who collect Social Security is 350,000. That's not how many retired last year. That's the cumulative total of all the Americans who are living abroad collecting Social Security. So 350,000. That might be a bigger number than you perhaps thought, or maybe it's exactly what you thought, or what have you. But if we look at studies that have been conducted by Zogby International, the Center for Medical Tourism Research, and other independent studies. What's interesting is that the number of Americans who've already decided to retire abroad in the next 10 years is 10 times as many, 3.3 million. So every year for the next 10 years, we'll have the same number of people retiring abroad as cumulatively have retired abroad every year up until now. That's really staggering when we think of the numbers. Of course, it begs the question, where are they going to retire abroad? And it's not just the 3.3 million who've already decided, because there's another 17 million who are interested or very interested in doing so. But we don't know if they're going to or not. These are the ones who definitively decided and are taking active plans to retire abroad. So where are they going to go? Well, the most popular region is Caribbean and Central America, for many of the same reasons that I found myself there. Pardon me. You think of proximity, family members, business interests, traveling to and from where you might be from, or family and friends coming to visit, cost of living, for example, climate. All of these are reasons that the Caribbean and Central America is the #1 region for anticipated growth in retirees. And that's been the case every year that surveys have been conducted since 2005. The very same list that I went through myself is what many of those 28 million Americans are doing for themselves. Remember, 91% of them only speak English. There's only one English-speaking country in Central America. That in and of itself is an unfair advantage. When you look at the rule of law, there's a difference between British common law, the same basis for law that we have in the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, the Cayman Islands, and Belize. It's very different from Napoleonic civil law, which you have in all of the Spanish-speaking countries of Central America, and doesn't have the same property rights and same protections that we're accustomed to with fee simple title and so forth. So as you go through the list of qualifications, you reach the same conclusion that International Living Magazine did when they said that Belize is the top English-speaking retirement haven in the Caribbean. So I would argue that there will be a disproportionate number of people who choose to retire to Belize relative to other parts of Caribbean and Central America, on the basis of going through the same process that I did as a family head 8.5 years ago. Now, the Wall Street Journal has had an article last summer where of the 350,000 Americans, they showed that 1 out of 7, 50,000, received their Social Security in Mexico. 1/10 of that number received their Social Security in Costa Rica, and only 1/100th of the number in Mexico currently receive their Social Security in Belize. Now, there are some conditions in Mexico, if you followed the news the last few years, that would cause a lot of Americans to consider not retiring there. With the drug cartels and the safety issue, the crime, the violence, it's changed radically. So again, I would argue that there will be a disproportionate change in the ratio between these two numbers. I don't think it'll continue to be a 100 to 1 ratio of Americans choosing to retire to Mexico than their much more safe and secure English-speaking neighbor just south of Mexico, the country of Belize. Now, a study by the World Tourism Organization showed that baby boomers are expected to double the size of the tourism industry in the next decade. So it's interesting, if you think of the two different foundation pillars, you have tourism and baby boomers. But what this tells us is where the baby boomers go disproportionately, where they choose to relocate, in those areas, tourism is going to double. So it's really a doubly unfair advantage that those desirable markets have. But there's another relationship between the two foundation pillars, the baby boomers and the tourism industry, if you will. It's illustrated here, and I apologize for the crude graphics, but I'm not it's not my forte. But we see the two different foundation pillars here. If there's 2,000 rooms in the marketplace, and that's represented by this little green house, if there's 2,000 rooms in the marketplace, these are all of the people, the families, the couples who are looking to come on vacation. They're all looking to rent a room for the night or for the week. But meanwhile, this demographic, the baby boomers, are looking for places to buy, not to vacation in, but to retire to. They're looking for a house or a condo that they can buy and then relocate, whether it's on a full-time basis or a seasonal or part-time basis, to be a second home or to become their new full-time home. And so for every baby boomer who moves abroad and buys a place to live, they've just removed a little green house from the inventory. So instead of there being 2,000 places to rent, now there's just that 1,999. So this group grew by 16% in 2012. It grew by 9% in 2013. And meanwhile, these guys are coming in and buying up all the inventory. And so what's happened is, remember we said in 2012, 16% of 2,000 is 320. That's how many new condos or hotel rooms we needed to add. We said there were less than 30 that were added. Do you think it's possible there were more than 30 people from this group that bought a home in that entire year? What that means is we actually had a net reduction in rental inventory. We had a 16% increase in demand, and the available supply didn't increase, it actually decreased. And there's no reason to believe, because we know that for 15 years, these people have the stated intention of cannibalizing this inventory. We know that they plan to retire abroad at the rate of 3.3 million over the next 10 years. So we not only need to build for this group, we need to build to accommodate this group. And everything that's being built today, every single unit that's built today, there's a cannibalization by these two different markets, both competing for the same inventory. It's like two different fish, both going after the same bait. So that takes care of our two foundation pillars of tourism and the baby boomers. The third foundation pillar is what I call the contrarian pillar. Now, I wouldn't be so foolish or to put on rose-colored glasses. I wouldn't stand up in front of you and tell you that all the statistics that I've given you with regard to tourism means that tourism will forever increase indefinitely into the future. We know that's not the case. In fact, we have to ask ourselves not if there will be another recession, if there will be a downturn in the economy, if there will be instability in the fiat currency of the US dollar, but when. When that happens next, what will happen? What happened in 2008, 2009 will happen again. There's cycles. Always has, always will. So the question is, what will happen when the market goes down? Not if it will go down. Let's all be realistic. Well, fortunately, because the last downturn is such recent memory for all of us, and because it was so staggeringly painful in its intensity, we only have to look back to 2008, 2009 to know exactly what will transpire. This is my office directly across from the airport on the island of Ambergris Caye. And in 2009, the number of people that came into my office and said, "John, I'm no longer concerned about what return I get on my investment. That used to be what my foremost concern was. Now I'm most concerned about the return of my investment. I just want to make sure I'm going to get my investment back." And so instead of one ROI, return on investment figure, cash on cash return, it was really just, how do I ensure that I don't get liquidated? These are people who had lost 30 and 40% of their retirement income, their IRA, their 401k, their mutual funds, their stock portfolio, just vaporized. And they came into the office and said, we can't afford to have that happen again. We can't afford to go through that another time. We need to take control of our financial future, and we need to have a say in where we're investing and what we're going to do. We still had our primary market. We still had those tourists and baby boomers who were looking for a second home, a vacation home, an investment property, a retirement property, vacant land to land bank. That market was still there. It didn't go away. And while tourism was affected Caribbean-wide, we saw a 20% drop in tourism across the Caribbean. In Belize, we saw a 1.8% drop. A part of that was because we're not an overbuilt market. As we've already demonstrated, we're very much underbuilt. So we had a 1.8% drop in tourism. We had no drop in prices. We've never had a bank failure in the history of Belize. The highest reserve requirements of any country in the entire world. Unlike the United States, where the banks are able to lend on a multiple of 40 to 1, fractional reserve banking, Belize actually takes the term reserve, like you find in the term Federal Reserve. Belize actually takes that term reserve seriously. They require that of every dollar that's deposited into a bank, 24% has to be held in cash reserves. Can't be loaned out. So that there are reserves. And that's the highest reserve requirement anywhere in the world. So what we saw was the number of people that were still buying property for the old reasons, I'll call it, stayed the same. But now we had people coming in the door saying, you know, it never dawned on me before, but now I'm concerned about wealth preservation and tax optimization and asset protection. And Belize has some of the strongest asset protection laws, the strongest, safest banking that there is. I haven't seen a foreclosure in 8.5 years. The banks have very stringent lending requirements. They require 40% down and charge over 10% interest. Makes it very difficult to purchase with financing, but it also means that when the downturn hit, people either had 40% equity or they had 100% equity. And because no properties dropped by more than even 10%, we didn't have any properties go underwater. There literally were no foreclosures in 2008, 2009, 2010. Very different market. So that's the reality of what happened in 2008, 2009, and I think it's very important to understand that there was a massive exodus of capital out of the United States. There were $3 trillion U.S. assets that were on the sidelines that were taken out of the stock market and just literally sat on the sidelines. We had a record year in 2009. There was more real estate sold in 2009 than any year prior to that. So we make the mistake sometimes of thinking that what our experience is in our home country is what the rest of the world is experiencing. 2009 was a record year for Belize when the U.S. was going through one of its worst times in recent history. And it was a direct result of the exodus of capital, people looking for a safer place to bring their capital, and they were bringing it to Belize instead of leaving it in the United States. And I would argue the same thing will happen again in the next downturn. That's why I call it the contrarian pillar. So if and when tourism does drop, I think it'll be more than counteracted by the fact that it'll result in an exodus of capital looking for a safe harbor, looking for safe reserve requirements as found in Belize. One last photo here of the Barrier Reef. And so what we've done, the market overview that I just shared with you is something that I've put together and I've been sharing for many years, 3, 4, 5 years. In fact, well before 2012, well before we hit 2,000 rooms, and much of this was in the way of a forecast of saying, here's what's going to happen when we reach 2,000 rooms. It's very encouraging for me to be able to look back and say that what I said then is in fact what's transpired. And so far, everything that I said 5 years ago has transpired exactly the way I thought it would, other than the fact that it's gone faster than I thought. I didn't think that we would see the airlines respond as they have, and I didn't think we'd see so many flights. In fact, this last weekend, in traveling throughout the island to different resorts and hotels and properties, we didn't find a single vacancy, not a single room available. In fact, most resorts told us they didn't have any room for a booking until April. That for all of February, all of March, they're completely sold out. So our demand has increased to such a point that now my concern is that it's hard, we have no way of measuring how much business we're now turning away. We have such a tremendous demand that the market is screaming and crying out for hotel inventory. And until now, hotels haven't been built. Remember that number, 670 rooms back in 2006? And we've grown by 1,330 rooms to 2,000 rooms by the end of 2012. Well, of that 1,330, only 30 of those were hotel rooms. The other 1,300 were condos. And yet in this market, hotel rooms is what we need. It's what the market demands, what it's crying out for. What every one of those people getting off the planes is looking for is hotel rooms. So it begs the question, why are no hotels being built? Well, because of the capital that's involved. To build condos, I can have pretty drawings and renderings, and I can sell an individual condo and have somebody make staged payments, and I can build with what's called OPM, other people's money. To build a hotel, I have to build the whole thing all at once. And there's no construction financing available in Belize to do that. And consequently, people have chosen to build condos instead of hotels, even though the market is crying out for hotels. So what we decided, myself and the rest of our team, and what Dave's been involved in for over a year now, is building a hotel that allows the scalability of investors to come in and participate to solve the needs and the demands of the market, as I've shared with you tonight. Now, obviously I understand that in the course of an hour, having a cursory overview of the market is no substitute for being boots on the ground and being there yourself. And obviously I highly encourage you to visit with Dave afterwards. In fact, there's By a show of hands, how many in the room have been to the island of Ambergris Caye, Belize? There's actually quite a few in the room. And so, I would encourage you to talk to the people in the room who've been to Ambergris Caye, who've visited the various resorts and hotels and properties, and can attest for themselves, and certainly Dave's had multiple visits to Ambergris Caye, and they can substantiate and validate the very things I'm sharing with you. But I'm going to show you now just real quickly what we've done in response to what the market is demanding and calling out for, and exactly the opportunity that creates. This is a property that is 67 acres. It's a gated community, and every bit of the property, all 421 lots, are waterfront with canal access to the Caribbean Sea. That may not sound significant, but there's a significant pricing premium to have access, especially when you're in a water sports capital of the world. So to have the access to the Caribbean Sea is just a tremendous intrinsic value. And so what we're doing is developing a residential resort community, the first part of which, the core of it, is the hotel. It's the resort inventory. So I refer to it as a residential resort community because at its heart, it's a resort community, but it'll also be a residential community. There will be people who retire there. There'll be people who live there full time. There are people who have second homes and third homes. But at its core, what we're doing initially is responding to the demands of the market and creating the hotel inventory that nobody has built in the last 14 years. That's how long it's been since somebody built more than 17 hotel rooms in any given property. 14 years. This is an artist rendering of the project. This is the first street that's being developed right now. It's a Belizean, Victorian, British colonial architecture would be the best way to describe it. It embraces the very best of Belize. Belize is a net exporter of many things. Belize exports citrus and tilapia and shrimp and sugar cane, bananas. We think of the petroleum. Belize is a net exporter of petroleum, one of only 17 countries in the world. They produce 5 times more petroleum than they consume. But I think what Belize is probably most well known for as an exporter are their hardwoods, particularly the 15 different Belizean hardwoods. We think of mahogany. Mahogany in Belize is used the same way that pine is in the United States. It's that abundant. That's our kind of our go-to wood. That's what you build a dock, or if you're just throwing something together, you throw it together out of mahogany. In fact, of the 15 hardwoods, mahogany is right in the middle on the hardness scale. Mahogany is not considered a hardwood relative to about half of the Belizean hardwoods. And so we've really taken to heart using the hardwoods, using the materials that are indigenous, that are available in Belize, and building a resort that represents the very best of what Belize has to offer. And so we've got several different unit types that are a part of the resort concept. As we look at the streetscape, just to get an understanding, this is Street 3 right here. This is where the construction has started, and this helps us to see kind of the layout. This was a preliminary rendition or rendering, but we've got what we call garden cottages. Garden cottages are detached bungalows or individual hotel suites. We have what's called a family cottage, which is either a 2 or 3 bedroom cottage. And we've got garden cottages or guest studios that are separate satellite bedrooms that can be rented as individual hotel rooms, or they can be used to increase this from a 2 or 3 bedroom house to a 4 or even 5 bedroom house if it's all rented together for a larger family or a larger group traveling together. And then we have what are called keeping suites, which are, it's like a fourplex. It's 4 individual hotel rooms on a given lot. I'll just show you just real quickly a couple of the floor plans and some of the photos. So this was an initial rendering of the garden cottage, and then this is the reality. This is what they look like when they're built. And this is the interior. We'll just kind of scroll through very quickly some of the interior photos. You can see the beautiful finish on the woodwork. All of the lumber is certified as sustainable by the World Forestry Council. What they do is it's such a large forest that it's harvested from that when they harvest the mahogany, for example, they'll go in and they'll clear 1,000 acres, and after they clear 1,000 acres, they'll replant it, and they'll leave that 1,000 acres, and next year they'll move to another 1,000 acres, and they'll move to another 1,000 acres every year until they come back where they started 60 years from now. They have 60 1,000-acre plots, because 60 years is how long it takes to have the mahogany grow to maturity, and that's a sustainable forestry method to ensure that there's always a replenishment of the hardwoods. You, of course, have to have the old hardwood forest there in the first place to be able to do that, and that's one of the beautiful things about Belize, having such a rich cultural heritage with all of the different indigenous hardwoods. Some more photos of the garden cottage. This shows the floor plan, the configurations on the lot. That's one of the unit types. This is a family cottage. There's a photo of it finished. And then just some of the interior photos of the furnished family cottage. So these again would rent by the night or by the week. These are the keeping suites. You'd have units on the ground floor and a separate room upstairs. Ground floor and upstairs, there'd be 4 units or 4 rooms per lot. That's what they look like side by side. That's the downstairs, has 2 queen-size beds and an outdoor living area. 2 little seating nooks there by the window, small kitchen and dining area. And then upstairs has an enclosed glassed-in living room, and it's a king-size bed upstairs, so it's a slightly smaller configuration. This is our construction team, all local Belizeans, led by Ken Grissom. Ken right here is our construction foreman. Ken has built 3 Four Seasons hotels. He's built 2 Ritz-Carlton hotels. He built the IBM Tower in Atlanta, a 45-story commercial tower, and he's built over 3,000 single-family homes along the coastal United States between Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. So Ken brings more construction experience than anybody else who's ever built in the history of Belize, and he's really representative of our having a best-in-class team. We've hired architects that are truly the best in all of the Caribbean and the Eastern Seaboard. If you've ever heard of Coastal Living magazine, they're responsible for the Cottage of the Year design for Coastal Living magazine. They've developed resorts or done architectural and design work for Bimini Bay in the Bahamas, for Camana Bay in Grand Cayman, for Rosetown in Jamaica, Seaside and Alice Beach in Florida, and they're currently doing projects as well as ours in Panama, New Zealand, Australia, and other parts of the Caribbean as well. So we really tried to hire best in class. What we found is that hiring the very best doesn't cost you money, it saves you money and makes you money. It may be a greater initial outlay on the front end, but we're really trying to develop a world-class resort, the likes of which the country has never seen before. And we're bringing in production building methods. We've built a 1.5 acre production facility right at the lumber mill, hired all local construction workers. We've got a 300-foot by 60-foot production facility, and the keeping suite, such as you see right there, is actually 13 components. It's delivered by barge from the mainland, and we're able to erect that and have that in place in 48 hours. So we can actually deliver 3 of those units per week on an ongoing basis. So our turnaround time or delivery time is 12 weeks, start to finish, on any of the different unit types that you see in a family cottage, garden cottage, or a keeping suite. Because again, the demand is today. By comparison, the other developments on the island that are under construction have a 3.5-year construction schedule. They're still building the antiquated way, if you will, but we've brought in the very best, and we're using the very best talent available to teach the local Belizean population the construction skills necessary, not only to produce for the project, but to really give them the skill set to be able to help to better other projects and other development throughout the country. So in addition to that, we have what's called the Bay Club. The Bay Club is really a beach club in the subdivision. We have a large area of water called Mahogany Bay. Project is called Mahogany Bay Village, and the Bay Club has sunset views. It's the only resort on the island that has sunset views. Most of the development along the island is on the eastern seaboard, where you have views of the sunrise. Which do you think is more desirable or more valuable, a sunset view or a sunrise view? Sunset. Not everybody, when they're on vacation, is awake in time for sunrise, but most people are still awake for the sunset. And of course, the sunset being later in the day, a little more desirable. But ironically, all the development on the island historically has been on the eastern seaboard, where it's the sunrise. And you think to yourself, well, why would real estate developers do that? Why did they build everything facing the sunrise? Well, it's because the town wasn't developed by real estate developers. 25 years ago, it was a sleepy fishing village. There were 600 people on the island 25 years ago. There was one vehicle, a Land Rover, and there was one hotel, the Holiday Hotel. In fact, the Holiday Hotel's been there 52, 53 years. But there were only 600 people 25 years ago, And the town is on that side of the island because that's where the bigger fish were. They were out there on the barrier reef. But the most beautiful views are the sunset views, and this is the first resort in the history of Ambergris Caye to enjoy and capture and really articulate the beauty of the sunset views. So, I know that you can't read the numbers here. That wasn't the intent. It's just very hard to represent on the board here. But what I've done is just in a nutshell to kind of summarize here, and we'll wrap things up, and we certainly have time for questions. But, pardon me one second. The project, as I mentioned, is something that Dave and his family have been involved in for a little over a year now. And currently on the ground, there are 30 units, 30 doors, if you will, whether it's a family cottage, a garden cottage, or a keeping suite. There's 30 units that are built, that are completely paid for. I should mention there's no debt on the development. The underlying land is paid for free and clear. There's over $10 million that's been invested in the land, the infrastructure, the utilities, dredging the canals, terraforming, if you will, going through the entitlement process, getting all of the permits and approvals from the Department of Environment, Department of Mining and Geology, Forestry, Mangrove. There's $10 million that's been developed in the ground with no debt, no liens, no mortgages against the property. It's the first real estate development in 22 years that I've been involved with that wasn't carrying debt of one form or another. And that's a pretty substantial thing to say in this day and age when you're trying to think of the underlying security of your investment. Now further to that, as I mentioned, there's 30 units that are on the ground that are completed, and those also carry no debt whatsoever. They've all been paid for entirely by investors. There are currently an additional 30 units under construction at our production facility that will be delivered on site in the next 8 to 12 weeks. And in addition to that, we have another 19 units that are on order. So we are just about at the point where we're closing in on 75 to 80 units that will be completed, just based on what's already underway, already either under contract, closed, partially completed, or fully completed. If we were to open the doors today, just based on what's already done, it would be the largest resort on Ambergris Caye without a dollar in debt and without ever having opened up to the public for sale. That in and of itself is an astounding feat. Now, we will open to the public. We will be open for general sales. We will sell individual units. But until this point in time, everything that's been purchased, everything that's been built has been done so on the basis of one of the three lot configurations, either purchasing a lot with 3 garden cottages, purchasing a lot that is keeping suites with 4 units, or the family cottage with 2 garden cottages. So when Dave said that he wanted to invite people to be able to share in the opportunity, what Dave has put together is what's called a real estate syndication. Now, are there any of you who've never heard the term syndication before? That might be a new term. And it's okay to raise your hand. I just want to make sure I explain real briefly what it is so that you understand. A syndication is when somebody puts together a real estate investment opportunity and basically breaks it down to make it easier to participate and take a bite. There's an old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You can't swallow an elephant whole. And so with the real estate syndication, it allows people to participate in an investment that might otherwise be out of their reach, might be beyond what their own capacity or capability is. So think of it in terms of 5 or 6 or 10 people getting together and all making an investment together, as opposed to sitting back and saying, well, I can't afford the barrier to entry or the benchmark of what it's going to take to be able to do that. So what Dave has done is he's put together a real estate syndication that has a minimum investment of $50,000. So that's the minimum amount to participate. And for him to do that, he's had to go through the process of registering with the SEC and doing what's called an executive summary. He has to do offering documents. So there's some compliance issues that have to be followed, that have to be done. And he has tonight for you executive summaries that he's going to go ahead and start handing out here. If you're a couple, then I would ask that just one per person. I think he probably doesn't have quite enough for everybody in the room, so I know he can certainly email to you as well afterwards, but what Dave has done is he's put together his executive summary, and he's also put together a preliminary letter of intent. And what that means is it's just a means by which you can express whether you have a preliminary interest. If the market is intriguing to you, if you'd like to know more about it, if you'd like to review the documentation and look over the executive summary, but it's a chance for you to express to Dave if you have an interest, and if so, at what amount that interest might be. It's not a binding commitment. I think it's very imperative to understand that. It's also not binding the other way, because as is often the case, syndications get oversubscribed. There's never a case where you happen to have exactly the right dollar amount. So you either seek to find investors for a period of time, or you find that you've actually been oversubscribed, in which case you have to go back to people and let them know that they can't all participate, at least not all at the dollar amounts at which they had hoped to. So it's non-binding in either direction, and again, this is just to give Dave an idea, because his plan and what he's already put together in terms of the paperwork is that this is the first of several lots that will be syndications, but this is the only one that he has currently at this price. He has optioned a lot at a price that's no longer available. So there's a built-in, what we call phased equity as a result of that. So for the people who participate in the syndication, they have the benefit of having gotten in at a price that was prior to there being 30 units completed, and prior to there being 75 or 80 units under construction. So again, you can't see all of the numbers here, and I understand that, and the reason you have the executive summary is for you to take with you, and Dave will be available to answer all the questions. There's a couple things I do want to just highlight or point out. On the executive summary,
I don't have enough executive summaries for everybody. What I thought I'd do is whoever filled out those papers and give them back, I'll have the executive summary up here that I can hand down.
okay,
Not enough for everybody, but whoever gives me the paper back, I think I got most of them. If I don't have a hard copy, I can email them out tomorrow.
perfect. So I think what's really important to understand is that an executive summary puts together what we call a pro forma. And a pro forma is an educated guess. The reason I say an educated guess is it's based on there being a certain occupancy. We know what the cost is. The cost is set in terms of what the construction cost is and what it's going to cost to actually purchase the land, build the seawall, build all of the units, acquire all the furnishing, have it be what we call turnkey.
That sheet is in the executive summary, so like John said, that was an expensive, but you will be able to read it.
Right. And so at the very top of it, it gives a basis for the pro forma. It shows, for example, that there are 3 seasons. We have peak season, which is Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, and Easter. Those 4 weeks of the year are booked months and months and months in advance. They always have been. And for example, at resorts today, if you want to stay for Christmas and New Year's, you had to have booked by last Christmas and New Year's. They book about a year in advance. So we can pretty safely say that those 30 days are 100% occupancy. Then we have high season. High season goes effectively from Thanksgiving until about the end of April. We have a higher occupancy that time of year than the rest of the year. 6 months of the year is what we call value season, when our occupancy tends to drop a little bit, at least historically. That's all changed in the last 2 years. In the last 2 years, we've had high season go from November 1st until August 15th. We've had 2.5 months that are value season, and we've had 9.5 months that are high season. That's the new normal, if you will, because of the demand that we've had. But what we've tried to do is to put together very conservative projections. The basis is to under-promise and over-deliver. That's what Dave wants to do. That's what I want to do. We'd much rather under-promise and over-deliver. And so just to give you an example, when you look at the numbers in the executive summary, you'll see that the rental rates are $165 or $195 per night. Now you can't compare that to a hotel room here in the local vicinity because it's not an apples-to-apples comparison. What I can tell you is that if you look at all of the hotel inventory in the entire market, our projection is to be the low-cost provider for the purpose of the projection. In reality, we expect that these will be in much higher level of finish than typical rooms in the market, and then they'll in fact rent for a much higher rate. But I have to be very clear that if I were to put into the pro forma, into the spreadsheet, what the actual occupancies are and what the actual nightly rates are, then instead of the 10.1% return that this shows as a projection to the investor and may not light your fire, so to speak, or blow your hair back, if I was to put in the actual rental rates and the actual occupancy, you'd see closer to a 40% return projected. But I know good and well that if I were to stand in front of a room of people and say that there's this wonderful investment opportunity in a foreign country you've never been to on the other side of the world and it has a 40% ROI projected, then you would immediately say to yourselves the same thing that I would say to myself, which is, well, it must be a risky investment to have that higher return projected. And unless Dave had been involved in this market for 2 years and actively investing in it for 1 year, then I think Dave would have exactly the same response that you would if I was to stand before you and tell you that the market could potentially deliver a 30 or 40% return. But I think it's very, very important to understand that the projections in the pro forma are intentionally conservative, because not everybody is going to have had the opportunity to visit the market and see it for themselves, or to have somebody explain, as I've tried to tonight, exactly what the critical drivers are and what's happening in the market, what the demand is from the airlines. Something very important to understand about all of the information I shared with you on the airlines, I could easily fly here from Belize, as I have, and stand before you and tell you everything I have, and you might realistically question and wonder to yourself whether there's any validity or truth to any of the statistics that I've shared with you. But remember this, the airlines do not add flights on the basis that if they fly it, they will come. The airlines do their research. They don't add flights unless there's pre-existing demand. So the airline part of the presentation tonight is what we call third-party validation, third-party credibility. What I shared with you about Islands Magazine, what I shared with you about International Living Magazine, what I shared with you about the government's commitment to invest $30 million into road, water, and sewer infrastructure, an amount equivalent to 10% of the total national debt of the country just in the next 2 years alone, is all indicative of third-party validation. So please understand that it's not just this, hopefully you friendly guy from Belize who's come here and is sharing these numbers pulled out of thin air. That's not the case at all. In fact, it's very validating for me that the airlines have decided to add all these flights because it helps to back up what I've been saying for the last 5 years. And so I would highly encourage you, if it's within your means, if it's not within your means, then I hope that tonight has been educational and informative. And I hope that it's at the very least opened your eyes to the fact that there are interesting things happening around the world. And even as it applies to the baby boomers, just understanding the demographics of what's happening and how the landscape is changing. I hope that the education portion of it has been beneficial for you. But if you do have a IRA, for example, a solo 401k, a defined benefit pension plan, if you've got money in a savings account earning 0.1% interest, or money in CDs earning less than 1% interest, then you're not keeping up with inflation. Inflation, conservatively, is at 3%. If you're earning less than 3% on any of your assets, then you're losing money, quite literally. The term for it is that savers are losers. That's not a value judgment, it's losers in terms of actual hard currency. They're actually losing money. In this day and age, for as long as we've had low interest rates, there's a penalty for keeping your money in cash. There's a penalty for holding CDs. There's a penalty for having savings accounts that are 0.1%. So for those reasons, I would highly encourage you. Dave, I apologize. I thought I had it teed up, but I was going to share a video with you. I had a video recorded from a gentleman from a company called Equity Trust. Equity Trust is a company that helps with self-directed IRAs. And a gentleman named John Bowens is their national education specialist. He lives in Ohio. He was hoping to be here tonight, but he had a prior engagement and couldn't attend. But he's a tremendous asset. And he actually recorded about a 5 to 6 minute video. And for those of you who are interested in contact Dave, I'll make sure that he emails it out to you, that talks about how to convert or roll over a 401k or an IRA to a self-directed IRA. I don't know if all of you are aware that you're able to purchase real estate with an IRA, and that you can own physical assets. You can hold a mortgage. You can own a promissory note with your retirement accounts. And so there's a lot of options available to you other than being at the mercy of Fidelity or Vanguard or the mutual funds that are out there. In fact, I would venture to say that for many of you in the room, you might have just invested more time in researching an investment opportunity in the time that you've given tonight, for which I'm very appreciative. You may have invested more time tonight than you have on some of the very things that you've invested in prior to now. There may be things in your IRA or 401k or mutual funds or stocks you've invested in for which you haven't put in near as much time, effort, energy, and due diligence as you have tonight. And so I would just encourage you to think about that, just for your own well-being, regardless of what you choose to do with regard to the Belize opportunity. Just to avail yourself and open your eyes to the opportunities that are available through a self-directed retirement program, like a self-directed IRA or a self-directed Roth IRA. So that's the in a nutshell what I had to share with you. I'd be happy to answer any questions whatsoever. There's no question that's out of bounds, so to speak.
Explain the risk of a hurricane.
That's a great question. So just to repeat the question, Gideon asked what the risk of a hurricane is. And Belize is located in the Caribbean. It's located in what's called the Atlantic Basin. And so the Atlantic Basin has a hurricane season that goes from June 1st to November 1st. And that covers all of the Caribbean, all of the Gulf of Mexico, and the entire eastern seaboard of the United States. And when you think of hurricanes, there's two primary forms of damage. You have the wind damage and you have the storm surge. Which is the more damaging of the two, the storm surge or the wind? Gideon?
Storm surge.
Storm surge by far. Much, much greater damage from the storm surge. So, first of all, I'll share with you, and you may not be aware of this, but when it comes to the wind damage of a hurricane can usually be mitigated against by the construction methodology. How you build can very much mitigate the damage from the winds itself. Now, many people are unaware of the fact that the majority of wind damage caused by a hurricane is not from the hurricane itself, it's from the tornadoes that are spawned by the hurricane. Case in point is Hurricane Andrew in 1992. Hurricane Andrew leveled massive areas of homes in Homestead, Florida, but it was the tornadoes, not the hurricane itself. Now, the tornadoes are such a powerful force relative to the strength of the winds in a hurricane that you can't mitigate, you can't build to protect against a tornado, but you can build to protect, at least from the winds, from a hurricane. So it brings us to the more damaging of the two, which is the storm surge. Now picture, if you will, in 2005, September 2005, Hurricane Katrina bearing down the city of New Orleans. Now it didn't help that New Orleans was 8 to 9 feet below sea level. That certainly was a disadvantage. But if you could have had the Army Corps of Engineers build a wall around the city of New Orleans, and that wall was a half-mile high and a half-mile thick, do you think that might have helped to bear the brunt of the storm surge and to spare the city at least some of the damage that was incurred? I would argue that it would have a significant impact. Well, that's exactly what Mother Nature has done. The barrier reef, the largest living barrier reef in the world, is over a half-mile high. And we don't think of it as being a half-mile high because it doesn't tower out of the water. But it's a half-mile high where it counts the most, which is underwater. And allow me to explain. If you've ever seen storm surge projections for the Chesapeake Bay, for example, or in and around New Orleans, or in and around Galveston, or anywhere in the U.S. for that matter, if you look at storm surge projections, you'll see there's vast disparities between how a storm surge affects one area over another, even though they're within close proximity. The reason for that is the distance that the water is shallow over which the hurricane travels. Now, I spent 2 summers while I was in college working in the Gulf of Mexico on an oil platform 200 miles offshore. I didn't do it so that I could answer this question, but it just coincidentally was very helpful that I have the knowledge that the water 200 miles offshore was 600 feet deep. 600 feet deep is relatively shallow when you think of ocean depth, and so to have 200 miles to go from 600 feet to shoreline is a long, long way to have shallow water. And consequently, that coastline was Cameron, Louisiana, fairly close to New Orleans. So there's a long distance for a storm surge to build up as you approach the Texas or Louisiana coastline. And a long distance of shallow water is exactly what is required to create a storm surge. The most perfect scenario that you could have, if we literally could pick somewhere on Earth that's, of course, if you're in an area that doesn't have hurricanes, I guess that would be even better. But if you're going to be somewhere that has hurricanes within the Caribbean, the absolute best case scenario in the world is to have the deepest water in all the Caribbean directly in front of you, where there is no shallow depth to allow for the formation of a storm surge. And then to have a half-mile thick, half-mile high wall of rock surrounding your home, surrounding your island, and then to have the water depth between that wall and the shoreline be only 6 to 10 feet and only be 400 yards. 400 yards is nothing relative to the size of a hurricane. There's certainly no time or room for it to build up any storm surge. The best example I can give you is October 31st, November 1st of 2005. Hurricane Wilma was a Category 5 hurricane, far more powerful than Hurricane Katrina. It made a direct hit on Cancun, much further north than Belize. We're actually out of the zone for most hurricanes. We have a very, very low frequency for hurricanes in Belize because we're so far down in the southwest corner of the Caribbean that most storms come off of Africa and go horizontally west, and at some point the jet stream causes them to turn upward. They either turn upward before they ever make landfall, or they go up the eastern seaboard, or they go through the Caribbean and into the Gulf of Mexico, or if they stay for a long distance before they curve, then they go to Cancun. But we're actually we're south of where that line is, and the jet stream just doesn't allow them to come our way. So the hurricanes that we have in Belize are typically only September, October, and they're only if the water's warm enough to form in the southwest Caribbean. But having said that, Hurricane Wilma was a Category 5 hurricane. The eye passed just outside the barrier reef. The waves on the barrier reef were 18 to 20 foot high. The waves on the shoreline were 2 feet high. The highest recorded water level in the history of Ambergris Caye, David, if you could, thank you. The highest recorded water level in the history of Ambergris Caye is 48 inches above sea level, 4 feet above sea level. Now, I've had people ask me, well, what about flooding? What do you do when it floods? I mean, if you ever have, 6 foot, 8 foot, 10 foot floods? And the answer is no. And you have to think of the topography. We have an island that's 24 miles wide, or 24 miles long, and it's 3 miles wide. There's no part of the island that's more than 1.5 miles from the water, from the Caribbean Sea. So even when we have 20 inches of rainfall in one storm, it takes about 2 hours for all of it to drain off into the Caribbean Sea because it doesn't have any further than 1.5 miles to go. So there is no way for it to, the 48 inches was the highest recorded water level, and that was from a storm surge. But 48 inches is really next to nothing. The floor level of all of the construction and development is 5 feet above sea level, 1 foot higher than the highest recorded water level in the history of the island. So I appreciate the question because that's, in fact, it was probably the most important question I had to answer for my wife's parents and my parents when I told them I was taking my wife and our 3 children, their grandchildren, and moving to the Caribbean. And believe me, I had to research hurricanes before I had any support or cooperation from the family. And I will say that in the 8.5 years we've been there, we have had one occasion where the call went out to evacuate the island from safety standpoint, and we went to the mainland. One of the benefits of Belize having a mainland, it's like having a big national park in your backyard, is that when there was a call to evacuate the island, the airline and all of the what we call the water taxis, all of the boats on the island, took everybody on the island, and in one day we were able to clear everybody out. We went, my family and I went to the mainland. We went horseback riding. We went up in an area called San Ignacio and Spanish Lookout, where the Mennonite and Amish population is, and we went cave canoeing and horseback riding, and I just had a 4 or 5 day vacation, and the storm actually, went up towards Mexico and missed Belize entirely, and we decided to stay an extra 2 or 3 days because we were having such a good time. But In any case, that's been our experience there, so I appreciate your asking. It's also, just to add on to that, it hasn't been asked, but insurance in Belize, property insurance, is what is called all perils insurance. And because we have such a low frequency of hurricanes, and because of everything I shared with you about the barrier reef and how it mitigates against the damage of the storm surge and the fact that we don't have tornadoes, all perils insurance in Belize is exactly what it says. It covers all perils. There are no exclusions, there are no riders, there are no addendums. You don't have to have separate flood insurance. You don't have to add extra clauses or extra coverage. And so property insurance is much, much less than it is in the United States when it comes to hurricane insurance, and it's automatic. In fact, when you buy property insurance, you can't get it without it covering hurricanes and tropical storms and flooding and fire and tornado and everything in between. There really is only one kind of coverage, and it's all perils. Any other questions? Yes? The taxes. Now that right there is what I call a softball. And what I mean by that is it's almost like you lob the ball and I got to hit it out of the park. And what I mean by that is probably the best news that I could share that I didn't include in the presentation. When you own investment property, in Belize, taxes are not based on how much income you make. It's not a graduated scale. The taxes are by industry. And so you can tell in looking at the government where they encourage people to invest. What I mean by that is if you look at restaurants, dive shops, tour guides, fishing guides, investment income, investment property, such as this, those are some of the lowest tax rates that there are. The taxes for a real estate investor, the taxes for the syndication, if you will, is 1.75%. Now it's 1.75% of the gross. So if there's $100 of income, it's $1.75. It doesn't matter if it's 100. I'm sorry, go ahead. You're still going to have capital gains. I'm sorry, you're right. You're going to have income tax on the rental income. That's correct. If you sell it, then you'll have capital gains. You won't have capital gains in Belize. Now, here's the bad news. The United States is one of only 2 countries in the world where you're taxed on your worldwide income. Just so you know, if you ever played trivia, it's Estonia is the other country. So the United States and Estonia are the only 2 countries that give us the privilege of paying our taxes on our worldwide income. If we were from any other country in the world, then we wouldn't have additional taxes. But you are correct. There are no capital gains taxes in Belize. And in Belize, there's a 1.75% tax on income. But just as you would have tax in the United States on your rental income, and just as you would have capital gains on the sale and disposition of the property, you would have a long-term capital gain on the sale and disposition of the asset. So that is correct. No, we're at least not yet. I can't promise anything in the future, but
what about the sewer and water?
That
Sewer and water, they have sewer plants.
Yeah, in fact, if you
They just drill holes for the crack.
no,
They do in the other one.
yeah, no, it's a very fair question. So just to repeat the question, he was asking about sewer and water, whether or not there's regulated municipal water and sewer, or if they just literally have untreated sewer or just don't care for it. So it was a very legitimate question. The answer is that when I mentioned the $30 million US that's being invested in road, water, and sewer, that's to bring road, water, and sewer beyond the current reach of the existing municipal water and sewer. The development that we're doing is entirely on municipal water and sewer, and it's the first development in the country to have underground power. And so we put in the underground power. It's a much higher cost to us as the developer, but it obviously is a much lower long-term cost in terms of repairs after a storm. The question of water and sewer is a very good one. In fact, I love the answer. When it comes to water, for example, we're on an island in the Caribbean surrounded by salt water, And there's a company out of the Cayman Islands called Consolidated Water. It's a publicly traded company. And in the Bahamas, in Grand Cayman, in Ambergris Caye, and many other islands throughout the Caribbean, Consolidated Water has what are called reverse osmosis desalination plants. That's a fancy way of saying that they take the salt water, they take the seawater from the ocean, and distill it and get purified drinking water from the ocean. There's a never-ending supply of ocean water, of course. And so on the island of Ambergris Caye, we produce between 400,000 and 450,000 gallons of drinking water a day. And by comparison, in the Bahamas, it's 13 million gallons a day. So it's a scalable system. We can, depending on the population growth, we can add as much capacity as we need to. What's different there compared to the United States is that there, Consolidated Water and the Ministry of Health and Belize Water Service, those three entities, measure the water quality every hour, 24 hours a day, for 7 different conditions. And there are more stringent water requirements in Belize than there are with the EPA here in the United States. So the water quality is very, very high, and there is municipal sewer. Now the municipal sewer presently serves about 3,000 households. The rest of the island is required to have what's called an engineered septic or aerobic septic. And there we go. So they do have very, very strong environmental requirements. That there are no leach fields, for example. You're required to have a self-contained aerobic engineered septic. You're required to have your septic reviewed by the Ministry of Health before a building permit will be granted. So very stringent requirements that are in place for development. It is very expensive. It costs $22 a month for a house. So I don't know what you pay for water here.
All your buildings are wood.
Mm-hmm.
And normally, most times, it's a masonry type building with
Actually, the architects we use, and of course we defer to the experts, they're the ones who have designed all throughout the eastern seaboard and throughout the Caribbean. There's 2 different ways to build to mitigate against a hurricane. You either build to be completely airtight, in which case you can't afford to have a hole the size of a dime, or the building will implode in high winds, or you build entirely for the wind and the rain to flow through the building. And if you look at the oldest buildings in Belize, if you go to Belize City, for example, all of the oldest buildings that are over 100 years old are made out of wood, and they're designed to have the wind and the rain blow through. You'll notice, you wouldn't have seen from the photos, but there's no sheetrock, there's no drywall in any of the structures. The structures are built entirely out of Belizean hardwood, and they are built so that when there's rain and there's a storm and there's high winds, the winds are intended to blow through the building quite intentionally. So we deferred to the best-in-class architects who've built more resorts and homes and hotels throughout the hurricane zone than any other architects or builders alive today. And they showed us and deferred to us that you have to choose between those 2 building methodologies. And they showed us that in Belize, the buildings that have withstood the best, the oldest hotel on the island, the Holiday Hotel that I mentioned, 53 years old, is wood construction. And so we chose to build that way for a very specific reason. But let me just stop just to see if there's any other questions. I'll be happy to come back to you, but just so that we can, in the spirit of fairness. Dave?
Piggyback on this question a little bit about tax. What if you go ahead and sell a property? Belize has some type of 1031 where you can lose that capital information.
Yeah, so just to explain, Dave mentioned about a 1031 exchange, and it's valuable information to know that just as you can do a 1031 exchange, a like-kind exchange for property in the United States and have a tax-deferred exchange or sale of the asset, you can't do a 1031 exchange from the U.S. to a foreign country. If you could, that would be wonderful. I wish that were the case. However, once you've invested outside of the United States, then it is possible to do a 1031 tax-deferred exchange foreign for foreign, because that qualifies as a like-kind exchange. Now, in this particular case where it's a syndication, you're investing in the company in the LLC, so a 1031 wouldn't apply. But if somebody's buying real estate titled property, and you buy in a foreign jurisdiction, and you don't have to do the exchange within the same jurisdiction. So just to give you an example, you could buy a property in the Cayman Islands and do a 1031 exchange to Belize, and it would qualify to be a tax-deferred exchange. Now, for those of you who don't know what a 1031 exchange is, we don't really have the time tonight to go over it in detail. I'll have to fly up here again when the weather's better, and no, I'm sure Dave will share with you, and I know the local real estate investment club can probably help you out in that regard. But for those of you who are familiar with the 1031 exchange, foreign for foreign works, and U.S. for U.S. works, but you can't go foreign to U.S. or U.S. to foreign. That doesn't work. I saw another hand.
You answered the question, though. I was wondering if you're investing into the syndicate or if it was just a individual property where you'd have to worry about management.
No, yeah, and just to further answer it, what's been done, a Wyoming LLC, what's called a single purpose entity, has been formed, and so you would be investing into the Wyoming LLC. The Wyoming LLC will in turn own the asset, but there's professional third-party management, multinational hotel management that manages the property, takes care of the insurance, the utilities, the property taxes. I'll touch on the property taxes in just a moment as well. I know it hasn't come up, but just to kind of clarify what those are. So it is entirely a hands-off investment with quarterly distributions. So that's part of the appeal of investing in a syndication, is that it means that you don't have to be involved. It is entirely a hands-off investment. That should be true of any real estate syndication, whether it's in Belize, here in Pennsylvania, or elsewhere. Property taxes in Belize are very, very low. I know you can't see on the screen that was up here, but at present, property taxes on a 3-bedroom house, and property taxes are increasing. I'll tell you what they're increasing to, because I'm one of the people who's helping to increase them. And don't throw anything at me, because I'll explain why that's a good thing. But property taxes on a 3-bedroom house typically run about $150 a year. And that's actually too low. I'm all for low tax jurisdiction. I like low taxes, but the problem with low taxes is if they're too low, then you just don't have money for infrastructure. You don't have money to improve the roads and add more sewer and add more water and those types of things. So I've worked with the town council for the last 2 years or so to figure out how to implement a property tax increase and have it be helpful and beneficial to the island, but not cost prohibitive and adverse to investment. And so what we've done is to come up with a formula whereby property taxes will be based on the number of bedrooms on improved property. It'll be $300 per year per bedroom. So on this project, where there's 3 garden cottages on the lot that's being syndicated, the property taxes will be $900 per year. So on a 3-bedroom house, they would be $900 per year. Now, on one hand, and this just shows you how numbers can lie, if all you heard me say was that property taxes were going to go up by 400% next year, then you might think, well, goodness, I don't want to have anything to do with that. Well, to go from $150 to $900 is a 400% increase. But who would agree that $900 on a 3-bedroom house is pretty reasonable? And in fact, I would gladly pay the $900 knowing that the extra $750 is going to help to pay for the infrastructure that's necessary and that's taking place. So I think it's very reasonable, but we wanted to have a basis for calculating what it would be, and we wanted to implement it in a manner that wouldn't shock everybody. So they actually gave a year's advance notice to people to let them know ahead of time that the increase was coming. Additional hands. Dave?
Back to Jen's question, do you want to explain, there is a syndication available for those people that want to invest, but there's also, when they're able, there's some of the investors group that could buy a lot straight out.
Sure. And so for those of you who couldn't hear Dave's question, and I'm glad he brought it up, the syndication, of course, as I mentioned, the purpose of a syndication is to allow people to participate in an investment they might not otherwise be able to afford to. I'll just give you one more example. Say there's a 100-unit apartment building, and you don't have the wherewithal to buy a 100-unit apartment building, but typically there's better economies of scale and a higher ROI, or a rate of return, on a larger building than on a smaller building because of the economies of scale. So a syndication might buy a 100-unit apartment building. You could invest in the syndication. You can't buy 3 apartments or 12 apartments out of 100 because you're either buying the building or you're not. But a syndication allows you to buy a piece of a building, for lack of a better term. You can buy a slice of pie without having to afford the whole pie. For those who can afford to buy the whole pie, for those who can afford to purchase and invest in their own lot, there's a higher return, quite simply. Because in order to put together a syndication, there's legal costs, there's legal fees, there's a management fee, there's the time, effort, and energy of Dave going down to Belize and finding the deal and sourcing the deal and putting it together and handling the quarterly distributions and managing all of the funds. And so there's a fee that's involved with the syndication. It's a very reasonable fee, and it's a fee that I think is highly justified. But having said that, one of the questions people have is, what's the exit strategy of the syndication, and how much say do I have in what the exit strategy is going to be 5 years from now? And quite frankly, the ultimate freedom of choice, if you will, is to own your own property, to own it outright. But again, there's a higher barrier to entry to do that. For those who have the wherewithal, then we certainly can share with you the information and the numbers and what that looks like in terms of buying a lot in its entirety, as opposed to participating in a syndication. But for those who don't have the financial wherewithal for example, a $500,000 or $600,000 investment, then the syndication allows you to have the same benefit of the higher level of investment, but at what might be a much more palatable cost or more affordable cost. And so there is a distinction between the two, but both are available. So I appreciate bringing that up here. Other questions? In the back, and then we'll come up here further.
Does buying into the syndication give you access to the property?
That's a great question. In this particular case,
Yeah, what we decided was to go with, okay, so you got a minimum $50,000 investment. A $50,000 investment is you're buying 1 unit. If you buy up to 3 units, you get a week stay per year in any of the seasons.
and so for those of you who couldn't hear, the answer was that $50,000 is the increment of investment. It's what we call a unit. So a person who invests in 1 unit would be $50,000. What Dave just explained is that if you purchase 3 units, a minimum of 3 units, which would be a $150,000 investment, then in addition to the proportionate share of the investment return that you would receive as your investor equity, your investor return, you would also have the right to use and enjoyment for 1 week a year. And you'd be able to choose that as you prefer. So that would apply to those people within the syndication that have an investment of $150,000 or greater. And so, and as Dave and I had talked about prior to the meeting, his goal and objective is that for anybody who chooses or wants to participate in the syndication, he wants to ensure that as many people as possible have a chance to participate. So if somebody puts down a willingness to invest at a higher amount, it may be that you're kind of curtailed on this first syndication to a lesser number. Of course, I think Dave will have to work with you, because if you were going to do 3 units with the objective of having use and enjoyment, he'll make sure to accommodate that. And he'll have to do it within the confines of the operating agreement and the offering documents. But the intent isn't for there to be just the one syndication. Anytime you're doing real estate syndication, there's 2 challenges. One is raising capital or equity, and the other is sourcing the deal. The harder of the 2 is sourcing the deal. It's much harder to find sound investments than it is to raise the capital, because there's a lot more investment capital available than there are sound investments that meet the needs and objectives of the investor community. In this particular case, it's a scalable opportunity, meaning that Dave can do 1 syndication and then turn around and doesn't have to reinvent the wheel and go out and source and look through 100 deals to find which one he's going to do next and have it be entirely different terms and conditions and returns. And so in this case, there's the opportunity to make it scalable. The company that we've hired to be our consultants is HBS Global Hospitality Services. That's a very long name. The shortened version is HBS Hotel Management. HBS is the largest hotel consultancy in the world, with offices in 40 countries. We've hired them as our consultants because, quite frankly, when we approached multinational hotel companies to choose who to do business with, 6 of the 8 companies we approached expressed a very high level of desire to be affiliated with the project. We approached brands such as Marriott, Hyatt, Hilton, Sheraton. We had 6 of the 8 companies we approached say that they wanted to associate their flag or their brand with the resort, but they wanted a 30 or 35-year contract to start before we ever opened for operations. And in the case of the branded companies, the flags, if you will, they have a residual that you have to pay, a franchise fee, if you will. And the franchise fee is presumably to help deliver a higher occupancy. But in our market, our consultants, HBS, said, we really advise you not sign a 30-year contract at this point. We don't know that a brand is actually going to be able to help you at all because the market's so strong. We don't think that a Marriott is going to result in a higher occupancy than being an independently branded resort. So we've followed their advice. Again, we've yielded to the experts. We've hired the experts to be our consultants, and now we're following their advice. And their advice was for them to help us to open with operations with an independent hotel management and to see how operations go for the first 2 years before we make a commitment or a decision to entering into a long-term relationship with one of the branded flags. Now, the cost of doing so isn't a burden to the investor, if you will. Just to explain real briefly, in resort management, hotel management, there's a much higher management fee than there is on long-term rental management, managing apartments or single-family homes, for example. But conversely, there's a much higher rental rate. A nightly rate or a weekly rate is considerably higher than what you get on a monthly rate for a house. You have daily housekeeping, you have reservations, you have guest arrivals and departures, so there's much more work involved with hotel management. The majority of resorts on the island have a 60-40 split. 60% to the owner, 40% to the management company. Joe, is that a lot higher than your management fee?
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So that being the case, 60-40 is the norm. There are some properties that are 50-50. And that's actually called the Marriott model. That's historically when on a Marriott-owned property, it's a 50-50. When Marriott owns and develops and then sells the inventory to the end user. Up until now, the most favorable split, management split on the island was 75-25. There's one developer called Sandy Point Resorts. They offer 75% to the investor. On this particular project, because of the economies of scale, we've decided to make it more generous in terms of the investor, so it's an 80-20 split. 80% to the investor, 20% to the management, and if there is a outside brand brought in, then that will come out of the 20%. And so that was done quite intentionally. It was so that the returns would be higher to the investor. There's only one other piece of property on the island large enough to do a project of this size or scale, and that will be phase 2. If Donald Trump came to the market next week, and my office has 80% market share on the island, so in all likelihood it would be our office and probably me who he would visit with. But if Donald Trump came next week, or any other developer for that matter, and they said they love the idea, they want to copy it or emulate it or model it, quite frankly, there is no other property available to do that. The largest available piece of property for a developer to come in and try to replicate what we're doing is just shy of 6 acres. That's the largest available piece of property on the island for sale. This project is 67 acres. We also have a 5-year head start over the rest of the market. If the developer responds to everything the airlines are doing, everything I've shared with you, everything TripAdvisor has said, and everything that the rest of the market has said, if you buy a property today to try to build hotel rooms, the entitlement process to get what's called an environmental impact assessment and then an environmental compliance plan, you jump through all the hoops with the Department of Forestry and Mining and Geology and Mangrove and the Department of Environment, and then to get all of the approvals, and then to start building, it would be 5 years that they would have to catch up to where we are. I wish I could say that it was a tremendous amount of intelligence 5 years ago to look in the crystal ball and see exactly where we are today. We're very fortunate that we started in the process thinking and hoping that this is exactly where the market would be, but not quite knowing that it would be as strong as it is, as early as it is. We didn't expect that 2014 we would be where we are today. We're very thankful for it because, again, we have a 5-year head start. The total sum of all of the development currently underway on the entire island in response to all of the flights that I've shared with you is our project, a condo project called Benicia del Caribe that has 86 condos, 60 of which are pre-sold before any of them were constructed. 60 out of 86 pre-sold, all cash sales, no bank financing, and it'll be 3.5 years until they reach market. And there's one other project called the Residences at Barrier Reef. 3 years until they open for occupancy. We'll be open for occupancy this fall, and when we open, we'll be the largest resort on all of Ambergris Caye, the largest hotel resort in the country of Belize, and it will be 3 years until another developer delivers any inventory to the market. That is an unfair advantage. So, with that in mind, if we have additional questions, I can answer them after, but I truly have to give my voice a break for a second, because I know it sounds okay, but it really, really hurts. And I thank you tremendously. One last question. One last question.
How many units fit on your
So that is a great question. So the question was, how many units on the footprint? So the 67 acres. Pardon me. The 67 acres is comprised of 421 individually titled parcels of land. And it's important to understand that because the three, I'm pointing to this as if there's a photo there, but the 3 garden cottages are on a separate parcel that has its own title, fee simple title, the same as we're accustomed to in the United States. So there's 421 titles in the subdivision. The density in the hotel portion of the resort is approximately 3 units per lot, because we either have 3 garden cottages, a family cottage plus 2 garden cottages, or 4 keeping suites, so either 3 or 4. The current plan is that the first 225 units will be the resort inventory. In addition to that, we'll have single-family homes, because as I mentioned, we know that there's a tremendous demand among the baby boomers, and we want it to be a village. It's called Mahogany Bay Village. There will be anywhere from 8 to 12 restaurants. There'll be a farmer's market. There'll be retail stores. There'll be commercial business opportunities. It will be a village. There will be a resort component to it that's higher density. There'll be lower density in the remainder of the subdivision towards the outskirts, where you'll predominantly have single-family homes, where you have people living there on a full-time basis or for half of the year. So in answer to the question of how many units or how many doors, if it were all developed as hotel inventory, then it could potentially be a maximum of 1,000 to 1,200 doors. But the reality is it won't be that many. The market will dictate, and the way that we've designed it is to allow the market to allow us to build for the tourism market, the hotel portion, and to build subsequently for the baby boomers, to build the residences, the 3 to 5 bedroom houses. And we'll allow the market to dictate whether we are just a little bit bigger resort or if we have a little bit more single-family home inventory. We've hired a woman by the name of Deborah Burns, who's a Harvard professor. She's one of the top retail consultants in the United States. Deborah was responsible for the revitalization of Faneuil Hall in Boston. Deborah has been a retail consultant for Disney, for the Rouse Company, for all of the Mills malls throughout the United States. Deborah is the inventor of 2 retail concepts. She invented the mall kiosk. Now, some of you may hate her for that if you've ever been harassed in a shopping mall, but she's the founder, the inventor of the mall kiosk. She first put those in Faneuil Hall in Boston. She's also the inventor of the pop-up store. So when you're in a mall and there's a big vacant retail space and they put in either Halloween decorations or Christmas decorations or sports, whether the Red Sox or the Phillies or the Eagles or whoever it might be, if there's a pop-up store for 30 days, she invented that concept. So we've hired Deborah as our retail consultant, again, hiring best in class. And she came down and spent a week visiting every resort, every gift shop, every restaurant on the island. She's assembling a team of people to help us put together exactly which restaurants, which retail stores. We just opened a coffee shop. I should tell you that 4 years ago is when we got our first cappuccino machine on the island. Until 4 years ago, you could not get a cappuccino or an espresso. That's third world conditions. Now, we just opened our coffee shop, and because none of us are coffee shop aficionados, what did we do? Well, we went to Deborah, our retail consultant. We said, Deborah, we need somebody who's best in class who can open up a world-class coffee shop for us. We don't know how to do that ourselves. So she went to her database and she contacted a gentleman in Cape Cod who owns a coffee shop and a sushi bar and a pizza restaurant, and he owns a diner in South Beach in Miami and has more restaurant experience than anybody on the island of Ambergris Caye. And Steve came down and put together our coffee shop and hired the staff and did the training and sourced all the equipment from the U.S. And the Rum and Bean Coffee Shop officially opens on Monday the 17th, a week from Monday. We've had our soft opening. But so that's how we do it. We hire best in class. And so it'll be exciting to see what restaurants we have to enjoy. But I hope that answers your question in terms of events, at least to the best of my ability. Well, I want to thank you very much. I appreciate your attention. It was a little longer than I thought, and we can visit afterwards as the case may be. I know that if you would, I know Dave would greatly appreciate if you'll just fill out the paper there with at least a preliminary interest level. As I said, it's a non-binding commitment. You're not signing up for giving away the farm at this point. But I think it'll certainly help Dave to understand who to follow up with and the level of interest, and for him to gauge whether or not, or I should say, how soon for him to be looking at filling the second and third syndication. Dave has got, as I said, option money that has secured a much more favorable price. And so obviously he'd like to know in terms of the lots that he's optioned, what level of commitment and how many lots he's going to move forward with. So I thank you very much for your time and attention, for your hospitality, and wish everyone a safe drive home or wherever they might be going, like you or thank you very much.
Thank you, John. We would like to see people go to Belize and do the tour and do what we did a year and a half ago. These guys, and John Turley is one of the tour guides, they put together a 3-day or 3.5-day tour, and they take you around and show you different properties and show you, basically prove to you what's going on down there and show you firsthand. Very educational tour. It's a lot of fun. Long days, they keep you busy, but it's good stuff, and I would recommend it. If you are interested on doing the tour, you can talk to me. I've taken a group of 13, 14 investors down. Some of the guys in the room here had a great time. But there's also groups going down through the real estate guides and John Curley that you can hop in with a group unrelated to us. We're going to be around to answer questions, visit with you guys as long as somebody else is in the room. So looking forward to that. And like I said, I don't have an executive summary for everybody in the room, but if you guys bring your papers up, I will trade it for an executive summary, and hopefully we'll have enough. If we do not have enough, I can email them out tomorrow or this week. So looking forward to visiting with you guys, and thanks for coming out.